Everyone knew Sarah Miller, the face on billboards, the neat signature at the bottom of charity lists, the woman who made a city look polished. Cameras learned the slope of her cheek, magazine columns learned the rhythm of her laugh. But there was a part of her the lights never reached. An evening habit, a private route through amber lamps and leaning mirrors, a thin corridor she walked alone when the parties thinned. She fell for the wrong man. He wasn't human. That was the first thing people said later, as if naming him could tidy what happened into a rumor they could pass along like a coin. In public, Sarah's life was curated like a well-made gown. The marble of her penthouse foyer gleamed. The photographer's shutters sounded like a distant applause that never quite stopped. Her hair smelled faintly of salon lemon, and the perfume she favored was a warm, almost dishonest thing that hugged wool coats on winter evenings. She collected things that declared safety. Porcelain stacked in glass cases, letters folded in precise corners, appointments kept and recorded. These objects were armor. They kept her ache at bay for most of the day. At night, though, the corridor called. It lived in a slice of the city that remembered both new glass and older stone, the narrow passage between a shuttered apothecary and a building that still remembered its gas fixtures. Amber lamps hung in predictable intervals. Mirrors leaned in small nests against cold brick, faces caught and then given back with a millisecond's delay, as if even glass were embarrassed by its duplicity. Sarah found herself there as if by habit and hunger both, trailing along the corridor until the city exhaled, and the echoes of other people's lives thinned to a hush. There, beneath amber light that flattened the world into warm color, she counted the things she had not kept. Birthdays misremembered. Names that slipped like coins through a hole. A mother's laugh that sometimes arrived as a shape without sound. She first noticed him at a gala whose press release promised to save old stone. The event was a glass bowl of light. Chandeliers, reporters in tuxedos, an organ that hummed beneath conversations. Sarah moved through the room with practiced ease, greeting donors, bending to accept a small floral corsage, smiling in a way that ensured it would photograph well. At the edge of the ballroom, in the kind of corner designed for people to disappear into, he waited like a shadow that had learned to fold its arms. He watched her without the particular hunger of most attendees. He watched as if he were verifying a fact. When she passed, he stepped forward with the kind of small, deliberate movement that made the crowd feel farther away. He said simply, "You walk at night." The line stopped her. Not because it was clever, because it wasn't, but because it matched a place she'd thought private. Recognition slid through her like a faint current. The ache she kept in the palm of her chest loosened its fingers for the first time in a long while. She answered almost reflexively, "Sometimes," and then regretted the casual tone, as if anything about that corridor could ever be casual. He introduced himself as a watcher of doors. He did not give a name the way people do. His words were fewer and ordered. He spoke like someone who waited rather than intruded. Call him the keeper, some said later. Call him the presence, other whispers preferred. He told her nothing about where he came from. He only admitted that he kept thresholds. He said once, when she had told him about the memories that blurred at the edges, "There are trades to be made." That first night they parted like a rumor, neither of them leaning into the momentum of a conversation that city gossip would understand. Over the weeks that followed, their meetings multiplied across thresholds. A velvet-dusted theater whose curtains did not quite reach the floor. The glass cantilever of a penthouse balcony with rain pooling at the lip. The fog that rose from the river like cloth, muffling the city's older noises. Each place breathed with a different kind of light, and each place was framed by a door or a hinge or a step. In these settings, things began to change in small, uncanny ways. Mirrors hesitated. Reflections took a beat longer to arrive, as if the glass had to rummage through pockets for the right version of her. A name tag at a charity readout skimmed out of alignment, and then, later, when she checked the press list, a sponsor's name had eased itself into another column. In an elevator that stalled for a single minute, the digital panel that usually displayed floor numbers flickered to something like an old calendar. She noticed less, then more. Less confidence in the names she used on the phone, more peace in the moments when she could not remember a slight offense, an insult that had once lodged like a splinter. The city, in its busy, necessary way, took all of these small slips as weather. The papers took other things as headlines. Sarah became a study in contradiction. To the world she maintained the exacting pose of one accustomed to being seen. To herself, she began to experience memory like a porous garment. She kept a ledger at first, an attempt to anchor the life that public expectation required. Entries were neat. Dinner at 8, call with agent, photographic shoot. But the ledger did not keep other things. The warmth of her father's hand on a Sunday. The tiny, precise way a childhood friend folded a note into her palm. Those vanished in softer increments. A necklace she could not place in a drawer would turn up months later wrapped in tissue she did not own. A photograph of her and some politician would slide its caption, substituting a date she could not reconcile with the pulse of her memory. Curiosity led her to corners of the city she had never visited, while her name was still new enough to mean discovery. A small bookstore that smelled of cold paper and dust had a proprietor who kept his eyes on people like someone who read the margins of newspapers. He listened to her in the way one reads a footnote. Careful. Interested. There are stories about thresholds, he said, not as an answer but as a preface. He offered her a delicate volume of essays on old city customs. In a penciled marginalia, someone had once written a line about a keeper who traded measures. The line was not explanatory. It suggested more than it revealed. Sometimes a person will give a piece of themselves to silence a recurring grief. The book did not advise. Each suggestion of a trade unsettled her like a small tide. The offer, when it came, did not arrive with the theatrics of a villain's monologue. It arrived in a room lined with frames where the glass had been removed, and in their empty grooves lay photographs, clippings, a child's drawing. The keeper had ordered the pieces with the reverence of someone cataloging weather. He let the silence be a part of the conversation. "You can be relieved," he said to her. He pointed at the frames, and in the absence of glass their contents lay raw, vulnerable to breath. But not without cost. He never used the word trade as if it were a commercial term. Instead, he offered what he offered as one might offer a cup of water, necessary, proportional, and exact. He told her, in sentences that slid like old keys, that certain memories could be taken, identities altered, measures retuned, so that the ache that curled like iron around her ribs could be eased. He spoke of names as if they were stones on a scale. Remove a pebble here, add a feather there, and the balance changes. Sarah listened. She examined her life as if it were a collection on a wall. She thought of the faces rallying for her at events, the endless calendar that was itself a kind of shelter, and the private hours of the corridor that the city never saw. Inside her, longing had the quality of an ache that had been sharpened by long use. It wasn't merely loneliness. It was the sensation of being known only in pieces, a collage assembled by others' hands. The prospect of relief was the slow, dangerous promise of being whole. She considered the price like one considers a surgical verdict. There were risks, unknowns, a long stretch of recovery that could include nothing like the person she had been. Choice arrived like weather. She could refuse and maintain the ledger and the curated life, and all the small but sharp pains that accompanied fame. She could accept and step through whatever threshold the keeper held, and in doing so erase a shape from memory. She had agency. She weighed the value of each recollection as if they were precious objects she could either keep or give away. She thought of names, the ones she used in business, the nickname of a woman she used to love, and weighed them against the quiet that would follow the loss of certain tethering memories. In the end, she was not compelled by pleading or coercion. The keeper was patient, precise, and relentlessly unhurried. He offered her clarity without spectacle. She chose. The crossing itself was not cinematic. It happened in a place of muted light, where the lamps had become small suns, where an old mirror angled against a wall caught only the suggestion of movement. Sarah approached as she always had approached a difficult decision, with the stubborn calm of someone who had rehearsed variations of regret. She laid down a small object from her collection, an ivory brooch, the kind she had worn to every opening when she first wanted to be taken seriously. The keeper inclines his head and opened a door that had not been there before. A seam in the wall, a threshold that smelled of the river at dawn and the varnish of old theater seats. She stepped through with her shoe catching briefly on the lip. That small snag, so human, left one shoe behind on the polished hall floor. a single proof in a life usually too composed for accidents. The night received her in a way the cameras never could. What greeting took her beyond our comprehension is not explained. The corridor closed, as if simply remembering its duty. The next morning the penthouse was immaculate. The bedsheets had been turned and smoothed as if in preparation for a return. The ledger lay open to a page where the pen had not been used. A shoe rested by the sofa like a punctuation mark. Her wardrobe was folded, her jewelry catalogued, and the city began to narrate the absence. Headlines ranged from the clinical, "Socialite vanishes, no sign of foul play," to the speculative, "Could it be an elopement?" to the outraged, "Security questions raised," but the cameras could not catch the one shoe. As the days grew into rumor, a different life of detail took shape. People described amber light pooling between buildings on clear nights. Children dared one another to stand in that light and count to 10. Some came back with a name missing from their mouths, an innocuous error that later grew into a blank no one could fill. Others returned quieter, their tongues clipped where they had once been loquacious. A scholar of the city's odd traditions wrote an essay that was at once careful and hungry, noting patterns of loss. A woman giving up a middle name, a man forgetting the tune of his father's whistle. Someone found, in a second-hand bookshop, a note in the margin of a book never properly catalogued. She chose. She walked through. The keeper became rumor again, a creature of shadow that fit easily into the city's appetite for mystery. Some called him in jest at dinner parties, others spoke of him in the hush of subway cars. He had not been interviewed. He did not pose for the cameras. That stance only strengthened the narrative about him. People told stories. Stories refined themselves like knives. The more the city talked, the less certain anyone was about the exact nature of the man Sarah had met. He was a presence, a watchman of thresholds. And for those who wanted a label, a non-human answer was neat and satisfying. In parlor speculation, "not human" became shorthand for all the things a city feared about losing itself. Those closest to Sarah offered different testimonies. A former assistant, who had kept one of Sarah's last messages, described a voice on a night call that was even and soft, like a boat moving against a dock. A friend in the social circuit remembered lunches with punctured laughter, and a certain steadiness slipping from Sarah's manner. There were quieter artifacts. A notebook of sentences she had started and never finished. A small child's crayon drawing recovered from a box labeled "Gifts" that had a figure with 2 long fingers standing between 2 doors. The details multiplied, but none explained. Rumor begot pilgrimage. People who felt a private fracture in their own lives came to the corridor at odd hours. Some left offerings, coins stuck into the mortar like no one intended them to stay. Some pressed their palms to the leaning mirrors, and later complained that a face had hesitated in answering back, like a tune returned out of key. A woman once claimed to have met the keeper, and to have discussed trade. She came back from that night limping in her speech, unable to remember the surname of a man she had been married to for a decade. But she claimed she'd never felt more at peace. Not everyone who stepped into the amber light came back altered. Some returned unchanged but with a kind of hush that made friends uncomfortable. Others never returned at all, swallowed by rumor into a bluish absence that people tried to name with numbers and dates and eyewitness accounts until the facts themselves resembled fiction. The city learned to live with the corridor's new reputation the way it lives with any neighborhood secret. Some accept it, some warn, some attempt to profit from it with ghost tours. Sarah did not leave a manifesto. She left one shoe and a life that continued its duties as if nothing had shifted. The media replayed press footage, her smile from 3 seasons before, the charity speeches, the clinking of champagne flutes. They played the last public clip, her raising a glass to preserve what is old, as if irony were a thing that could explain disappearance. There were op-eds about the loneliness of being always on display, and think pieces that used her absence as an example of what happens when privacy erodes. The scent of old books and varnish and the metallic tang of the river became part of the story. The city kept retelling it. Sometimes, on clear nights when the wind came down the avenues and the amber lamps in the corridor burned at full, a woman on a high balcony would press her hand to the glass and try to name a memory she had not yet lost. She would trace with a fingertip the crease of a dress she once loved or attempt to say a street name that now had become a blur. Those gestures were private, almost ritual. They admitted that we keep parts of ourselves in small, fragile compartments. The ledger of a public existence cannot encompass the rest. He remained something people said in low voices. He remained not human in the way that the city needed him to be not human, because the human answer was more difficult to live with. Saying he wasn't human was a way of making his patience into something monstrous and therefore explainable. Yet to those who had been near him, who had spoken in the hush of thresholds, not human felt like the least of it. It suggested an ontology that refused to be contained in ordinary definitions. He was older than rumor, perhaps older than the city's memory. He simply kept doors. The last thing anyone saw of him was a shadow sliding back into a corner of the same gala where they had first met, blending into the crowd as though he had never been separate. Later, children dared each other to walk the corridor, and then fled the amber lamps towards laughter that was not quite the same. A scholar in a dim room collected clippings and testimonies and agonized over chronology. A bookstore owner kept the penciled marginalia as if it were a talisman. Each of these people contributed to the city's tale. The legend that grew around Sarah became a kind of elegy for names and the cost of being known. People repeated the facts they could agree on. A woman of light and public devotion, a corridor of amber, a man who watched doors, a shoe left behind. They added details that fit the mood of their lives. The story became a room in which every new teller furnished a chair. Years later, someone would find a sentence in the edge of an old notebook written in Sarah's hand. A single line of ink, looped and careful, that read like both explanation and farewell. It said nothing about the man's origins. It said less than the rumor required. It only read, "I traded what would not let me sleep." That sentence did not redeem or indict. It simply gave one deliberate footprint in the sand. And the city kept its amber lamps burning in the corridor, where glass hesitated and mirrors leaned in. Children still dared each other beneath that warm light. Couples on humid nights watched the glow spill between buildings and imagined histories they could not have lived. The keeper continued his slow, exact watch at thresholds, his patience unhurried, his manner as if keeping a ledger at the edge of the world. People would speak his name, if they had one, and others would shrug and call him by a title that felt tidy, the keeper of doors. But the truth that most would repeat at the end of their story was simple and hard. Sarah Miller fell for the wrong man. He was not human. The phrase became a way for the city to mark the moment when longing met an answer it could not safely name. It closed conversations, like a door it had finally decided to keep shut. If this kind of slow-burn mystery is the sort of story you like, linger here a little longer and subscribe for more tales that move in the spaces between light and shadow. If you know someone who walks the city at night searching for things they cannot name, share this story with them. The corridor will keep its lamps. The city will keep telling it. The last image is of the single shoe by the sofa and the amber light that still pools between buildings, patient as memory, unquestioning as loss. He was not human. He kept the doors.